He said to me, "Why does your hair look like that?" I said, "What, like this?"
Yeah. Oh, good morning, good afternoon, good evening.
He could have been talking about my beard.
You are. Yeah.
Sorry, Rob.
Oh.
Yeah. Welcome to another edition of the Digital Download, which is the longest running weekly business talk show on LinkedIn Live, now globally syndicated on the IBGR network.
Boom.
Today,
Good job, us.
yes.
So are we officially
Today we're going to be
radio
talking. We are officially radio hosts. We are.
We can put it on our
international
LinkedIn profile.
Radio hosts absolutely can. Today we're going to be talking about driving business success through HR leadership. We have a special guest, Tom Applegarth, to help us navigate the discussion. With HR leadership experience across the United States, as well as Europe, Asia, and Latin America, Tom now serves as the head of outsourced HR services at Preferred CFO. But before we bring Tom on, let's go around and introduce everyone. And while we're doing that, why don't you in the audience reach out to a friend, ping them, and have them join us? We strive to make the digital download an interactive experience. Audience participation is highly encouraged. So, with that, introductions. Alex, would you kick us off, please?
I would love to. So I'm going to say hello, and I'm also going to make a very good excuse. So my name's Alex Abbott. I'm the founder of Sapiro, creator of the Conversation Operating System. And I'm going to have to duck off very soon. And it's a shame I'm having to do that because I was really looking forward to this session, but I have a good excuse. For those of you who don't know, my wife and I breed dogs, miniature Dachshunds. And one of the dogs, so the lady dog, known as a bitch, which I don't like to say out loud, especially not on a live show.
And there we go.
Needs
Yet there it is.
Needs a fertility test doing. And I have to go and take the blood sample to the lab. That's why I have to leave. And timing is everything when it's fertility. So yes.
All right. Well, you're going to need a doctor's note when you come back.
The things I'm learning about dog fertility today that I didn't expect to learn.
And that's why we're the longest running weekly business talk show on LinkedIn Live. Thank you for that, Alex. Tracy.
Well, I don't have any dog fertility tests.
Yeah, good luck following that up.
I am Tracy Borison, owner of TLB Coaching and Events, where we care about authentic marketing, and that's pretty much it. And yeah, I mean, good morning. I'm back. I wasn't here last week, and I'm excited to be back.
Love having you back. Good to see you again. And myself, I'm Rob Durant, founder of Flywheel Results, a proud DLA Ignite partner, and we help startups scale. All right. So, as I said, this week on the Digital Download, we're going to be speaking with Tom Applegarth, and a 30-year veteran in the HR human resources industry, including serving high-profile companies such as Goodyear Tires, Belden, Potter Electric, and Young Living. Tom has made a significant impact on organizations optimizing talent and fostering growth. Tom, good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Tom.
Hello. Glad to be here.
Tom, let's start by having you tell us a little bit more about you and how you got here.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in Utah and went to Brigham Young University. And that is when I first majored and got my undergrad in history, just because I love history and love to read, and didn't really think a lot about what I would do after I graduated. So I graduated and then was like, now what do I do? And And so decided to continue on and go to business school. So I got my MBA at Brigham Young University as well. And that's really, the first semester they make you take finance and accounting and marketing and then HR and organizational behavior class. And way back when I was going to BYU, Stephen R. Covey had been a professor of BYU and had left not too long before I went into the business program, but was still coming back and giving some lectures and was a big presence on campus. And so a little bit between my organizational behavior class and the influence of Stephen Covey, I decided that human resources and organizational behavior was really what I wanted to do for my career. And then Amico came and recruited on campus. And so I moved to Chicago, and that was my first job out of school. And I was there for a few years, and then went to work for Payless Shoe Source, which at the time actually sold more pairs of shoes than any other retailer in the United States. And it is just amazing to me that a company that had 4,500 stores, sold 200 million pairs of shoes, is now pretty much out of business in the United States. But I guess that's evolution and bound to happen to many companies. But I was there for 8 years in a number of different HR roles, and then went to work for a company called Flowserve that made pumps, valves, and seals. Then went to work for Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, and then went to work for Belden, and so for the last 30 years, I've just been in a number of different industries and a number of different places in different HR roles, managing big divisions of from an HR perspective for Fortune 500 companies. I was the head of HR of a smaller company, Potter Electric. There was about 250 million in revenue and about 700 employees scattered around the globe. And last year I moved to Utah, and I've joined Preferred CFO that outsources finance and accounting, or does work for small companies around finance, accounting, HR, and payroll. And I'm running their HR practice, and so having a lot of fun working with small companies and helping them manage their HR functions.
Excellent. Thank you for that.
There's not much you've done then, Tom.
Yeah.
Not much. At least definitely not much outside of the space of HR.
Tom, I want to start with a foundational question. What are some common misconceptions businesses have when it comes to talent management and succession planning?
I think, and especially as I work with small owners of businesses now, I think a couple of mistakes that I see many of them make is, first of all, thinking that they can be that they know everything about the business, and try and be the expert in every single area. And so I think that's just a common problem and issue. And nobody's the expert in every area. And so I think it's good to kind of realize your limitations. And then the next issue is everybody thinks that they're going to be around forever, and that everybody that works for them is going to be around forever. And as my idol Stephen Covey would say, it's really focusing on, everybody focuses on the urgent rather than what's important. And succession planning is never really usually urgent. It becomes urgent when somebody leaves and you're like, oh no, what are we going to do now? But it's really, really important to think about that. What are we going to do if one of our employees wins the lottery or something else happens and they leave? And having a great plan on what you're going to do in that circumstance really is beneficial, rather than waiting until it happens and then scrambling. You're always going to have a suboptimal solution if you're not planning about it well in advance.
You talked about people thinking they're experts at everything. And it reminded me of one of my favorite TED Talk videos. Fantastic title. Title is Want to Help Somebody? Shut Up and Listen. I love that. It's by Ernesto Ceroli. He's written a book, different title, and Ripples on the Serengeti. Love his talk. But in that talk, he talks about organizations need to do 3 things to be successful. And never have they ever found one individual who was great at all 3. Those 3 things: you need to make the product, you need to market the product, and you need to manage the money. Some can do only one, some can do 2, but never have you found an expert that could do all 3. It takes a team. And just hearing you talk about that, and you know, the small business leader thinking that whether they think they're an expert or not, thinking that they have to do all of that is probably one of the biggest problems that small businesses face, that they don't even know they have.
No, I'd agree with
Tracy,
that.
I'm sorry I cut you off.
No, that's a good point. So I'm glad you did. My question was about this concept of succession planning while people are still there, because I think a lot of times people think that maybe that's, I don't know, just not, we shouldn't do that because this person is here. We don't want to have to plan for that. But I'm just wondering from your experience, Tom, like, what is the experience of that? I think there's a responsibility there. I think it also to some degree takes the pressure off of me, say, as an employee, to say, like, what happens if I decide to not come back from maternity leave or these types of things. But at the same time, I also think that potentially it opens a window to like a deeper conversation that would allow employees to invest more in the conversation and maybe then stay longer. So I was thinking all these things. So I'd love to hear what you've experienced.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's always an owner of the business, right? Whoever that might be. You know, I've worked for publicly traded companies where the owners, you know, thousands of people and thousands of entities, and then I'm working with several companies now where there's like a single owner, and everybody understands when you have the conversation. And there's certainly some people kind of get a little defensive when you start first having the conversation, but you just kind of talk about it from a common sense business perspective, right? Whoever owns this business wants to make sure that they have a contingency plan for everything, right? And if they're not, they're not a very good business owner. So they should be thinking about every possible issue they could have in their business well before they have it, and have a plan on how we're going to address it. And so I always approach it with everybody saying, well, look, you know, any one of us could win the lottery tomorrow. And, you know,
from your lips to God's ears.
Yes.
Exactly. And we're probably going to make a few changes in our lives if we end up with $100 million or whatever the jackpot is worth today. And, you know, and then if you want to have a little more pessimistic viewpoint, any of us could get in a car accident tomorrow. 40,000 people every year in the United States die in a car accident. It's the most dangerous thing that any of us do every day. And yet we all do it every day. But any of us could get in a car accident. And so, you know, if the good thing happens or the bad thing happens, either way, there's going to be change. And one thing that, you know, we all know is we know there's going to be constant change in any organization. You know, people don't come into a job and stay forever. And so there's going to be change. And so the owner of the business needs to plan for that contingency as well. It's just one of those things. And so, you know, like planning for any potential disaster, it's not that it's going to happen, but if it happens, we need a plan. And so I think you just talk people through that, and then everybody's like, oh yeah, we need a plan. And then some people, you know, the people that love to teach and develop others, you know, get really excited about this. And I've had many leaders and managers who are almost anxious to develop somebody to replace them, even though they don't necessarily know what that means for them, but that's just a big sense of accomplishment for them. And for a lot of businesses, it's really good, because then if it means that if you've developed your successor, you can now, and you're still a valuable member of the team, but you're like, hey, look, I want to go do this. We're not doing whatever it is well as an organization. I want to expand my job, and I'm going to go do this. And you don't have to worry about what I've been doing every day for the last 2 years, because I've developed my successor. And in fact, that's something that I often preach, and especially in bigger organizations that I've been in. It's like, what's the best way to get a promotion? Develop your successor. Because nobody likes to admit it, but in a lot of these big organizations, there's all kinds of people holding others back from a promotion because they're like, it'll be too detrimental to the business if we move them out of their role. Well, you kind of take that argument off the table if you've developed your successor and convinced everybody that person can do your job as well as you can.
I've told that to my students. In fact, if you want to advance your career, you have to work yourself out of your current role, and you have to continually be doing that, because if you are too valuable to promote, you've actually stymied yourself. But yep. Tracy, I love the point that you brought up about the sensitivity around the topic. We don't want to talk about replacing Rob. It reminds me of a conversation I was having with somebody the other day regarding the other end of that spectrum, the job interview. And when you're in a job interview, you might think it's all about you. It's absolutely not. It's about the role and how well you can perform those tasks. Once you get into that role, why would that change? Wouldn't it still be about getting those tasks accomplished? And whether it's Rob that does that, or Rob who just won the lottery and moves on, and we hired Tracy to do it, but now there's a succession plan in place, and she knows exactly what she needs to do to be successful there, that kind of thing. So I guess it just needs a reframing of that conversation.
Can I add a level of complexity? Because I think this is
I'm sure you can.
I'm sure, yes is the answer. So I think this depends on the hiring team, though, to some degree too, right? Because I think there's people who hire more for like a culture add type of thing. Like, we have this as a missing component. I look at this all the time from a marketing. I love to just look at marketing job descriptions and then ask people, are you hiring for exactly what you had before? Because I would need to know that exactly what you had was working perfectly for you, because otherwise, why would you hire for exactly what you had before? That's the type of hiring manager I am, right? So I'm always trying to fill a gap, which isn't necessarily the same then as succession planning in an interview stage, right? So I just wanted to, I think there are people who hire for task doing, and then I think there are businesses that hire for the bigger picture. Like, how can this human contribute to the team, which then would actually maybe be the opposite of, I've joined an organization where the culture is for me to work myself out of this job so I can go to where my potential is taking me. Both exist, I think.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, and absolutely. I mean, I think that every company needs to not only determine whether or not somebody can do the tasks associated with the job, but are they going to fit in the culture, and are they going to be additive to the culture? Because some of the worst hires you can make are very technically proficient people, but who really change the culture for the negative.
Tom, I've been in that scenario where you hire somebody who matches the job description perfectly, right? And you're like, their education matches and their skills matches. And then there's just like a weird, the team doesn't jive, right? There's no us. There's just that person doing their job and me doing my job. And but we have to work together at the end of the day, and we can't do that. So now we have to go back to the market and find another person to do this job, which is then frustrating for everybody.
for sure. And very costly to a business, no doubt.
So Tom, when it comes to succession planning for an organization that's really never given it any thought, where would you suggest they start? What's that first conversation like? Who's in that conversation?
Yeah, so I think it's always easiest to start at the top. If for a small company, sometimes I've been in larger companies where you start with a leadership team if the rest of the organization really isn't ready or doesn't want to do it. But I think you start with a leader and their team. And I always start with, well, let's just have a conversation and let's just talk about, each specific job. So let's talk about the head of marketing for this organization. Okay, who do we have that we think could ever possibly be ready? And usually when you start that conversation, there's not usually a lot of names that kind of come to people's minds, but you just explore it and say, I'm not saying ready now. I'm saying like ever ready, like in in their entire lifespan, could they ever? And then, that starts to free up the conversation because certainly, people that are fresh out of university or just starting their career, that's one of the beautiful things about bringing somebody in is you can imagine that person maybe being anything at some point in time, right? Because they haven't proven you wrong yet, and they haven't developed a lot of bad skills, and so it's but I think it's just starting the conversation, and then with each job on the leadership team, just coming up with a list of potential. And usually it's actually pretty normal that you hardly ever come up with what I call ready now candidates, people that could step into the role today, for a lot of reasons. But you rarely come up with ready now candidates. But you usually in a conversation can come up with people ready in some time frame, whether it be 1 to 3 years, 3 to 5 years, more than 5 years, more than 10 years, but in some kind of time frame, you usually are able to come up with some group for at least some of the jobs. And I think it's a really valuable, and it's worth, and it usually doesn't have to be a real long conversation, but it's an hour or two conversation and you come up with a list of names. But I think it's really, really valuable because there are always some positions that have a lot more names than others. And where you have no names for some of the positions, that's the next place to start the conversation is, okay, where we have no names, what are we going to do? What's the plan to at least get some names on the list? And then where you have names, it's a very positive exercise because then now you can talk about, well, let's go talk to those people and see, first of all, whether or not they're even interested in somewhere down the road moving into that job. Because if they're not, then let's take them off the list. But if they are interested, now let's talk about development activities and put together a plan on, okay, we don't think they're ready for, 4 or 5 years. But what are the skills, abilities, and experiences that they should have, that they're going to need to have in the next 4 or 5 years to be in that position? And sometimes that's a real daunting task for people and kind of overwhelming. And so it's like, well, let's not think of everything, but what's a couple of steps in the right direction? And let's kind of put together a plan on at least a couple of steps in the right direction. And let's put a time frame around it. And then let's, schedule another time, a few months down the road to see how we're progressing on those 2 or 3 steps. And then we can think of another 2 or 3 steps. But, I think it's like anything, it's often overwhelming when you think about the task, but it's just getting started and taking the first steps.
So I was envisioning that first step, that room full of leaders. I'm thinking of the organization that has 300 to 500 employees total. And you've got, as you said, let's start with the CMO, for example. As soon as that CEO starts that conversation with that room full of leaders, your CMO, your CRO, your CHRO, and so on, I can envision the CMO really squirming in their seat. Because I've always talked about, work yourself out of a job, but I've always thought, bottom up. At the CMO, there's really no more up. How motivated are they to groom their replacement when there's nowhere for them to go? How likely are they to sabotage it? How likely is the CEO to hold their feet to the flame, so to speak, make them responsible for having a second in command? What do those conversations go like?
Yeah, and absolutely, that is an issue. The good thing, so when I was, the head of HR of Potter Electric, or when I was the head of HR of the broadcast division at Belden, I was in that exact same scenario. And that, I think, is one of the key functions of the head of HR of any organization, because usually, and it's always been the case in my specific example, and it's the case, I think, more often than not, that most of the time, the head of HR does not want their boss's job, right? So they're happy in HR. They don't look to become a general manager or a CEO. Nope, this is what I want to do. And so that's the person that the head of the organization needs to give the responsibility to, of developing a good succession plan and development plans and making it real and making progress. And one of the metrics that I always like to have organizations have is something around the number of positions. And and you can define what those are, whether it's all manager positions, whether it's just kind of senior level positions, but you ought to have some metrics that the HR person owns on what percent of those positions have ready now successors, have successors that are going to be ready in 1 to 3, have successors that are going to be ready in 3 to 5. And really, like anything, what you measure is what's going to get worked on. And so the HR person has to own that. Now, what makes a good HR person is someone who can work through the organization and get most people to buy in to the vision of what we're trying to do and what we're trying to accomplish. Because the HR person's not going to be able to affect that metric on their own. They need the entire organization to work with them to put together the plan that's going to improve, continuous improvement, every quarter, every year, on what our succession plan looks like. And the HR person needs to work the organization and needs to work with the CMO, who might be a little antsy about, wow, I don't really want to develop my successor. Well, look, this doesn't mean, even if we had somebody who could do your job tomorrow, that doesn't mean that that the CEO is going to make a decision and decide to do that. I mean, why would they? If you're doing a great job, it's always better to have, it's way better to have 2 people who could be the CMO, but one happens to report to the other. And that gives you an opportunity to delegate tons of projects and frees you up. And you no longer have to work 70, 80 hours a week. Maybe you're only working, in fact, the best CEO I ever worked for probably worked 30 hours a week. He had delegated everything. And when he decided to leave the organization, he had a successor that stepped into his role. The board was still sad to see him leave, didn't want him to leave. He was still a relatively young man in his mid-50s, but had his successor all developed, and they weren't going to push him out. He left when he wanted to leave, when he, had made enough money and wanted to go do something else. but he wasn't intimidated by developing his successor at all because he knew the board was not going to push him out before he was ready. But he also knew that he wanted to leave a legacy and wanted somebody who was there. But he had developed this successor from a marketing leader in a small business unit to eventually being the COO, where most of the organization was reporting to him for a couple of years before the CEO ever retired. And that's what allowed the CEO the last couple of years to probably be working about 30 hours a week. I always used to kid him, I'm like, I think you got a part-time job here. He's like, well, that's what good leaders do.
Yeah. Awesome.
I think this is an interesting point too, because from a succession planning point of view, or from any kind of point of view, you can only influence the mindset of the individual person so much, right? So if you have a CMO who is like really concerned about the thought of being replaced, then, I mean, hopefully a good HR person could also help with that, the mindset transformation. Hey, Bob.
Yeah, for sure. Well,
but also that, like, to some degree, that there's an individual activity there, right? Like, I have to look at, why do I have this story in my brain about being replaced? This isn't about being replaced. It's about being succeeded, right? Because at some point, I'm going to be too old to want to do this job. At some point, maybe I want to go and spend time with my kids or go traveling, or like, it gives me the freedom. Tommy used the word opportunity. I think there's this, when we look at things like that as an opportunity, there's a different possibility for people to look at it that way, instead of thinking. I think where people get stuck, where people get nervous, like you said, Rob, is when they think they're going to be replaced. And if you've done what you can do to like earn this role, like you said, Tom, with that CEO, people aren't going to push you out. It just gives you the freedom to have the possibilities. And hey, I would love to be like a part-time CMO, right? You have all this professor who can do most of your stuff, and now you can like take on some of those other things that maybe you want to volunteer for a nonprofit, or you want to start a nonprofit arm of your business, or like there's just, I like to look at things from the possibilities point of view. So I think there's a really great opportunity in succession planning to reframe that around the possibilities for you as an individual and the possibilities for us as a company when we are doing these things.
Yeah, and there's no doubt one of the roles I played a lot in my career is convincing leaders that you can't be a great leader and be threatened by having too many qualified people on your team. That is a limiting factor to being a great leader. If you're going to be a great leader, you have to develop your team to be great. And some of them may at some point in time become, really, really good and could probably do your job. But that gives you an opportunity to really take your job, to expand your job, and to make your job something that nobody ever envisioned when you first took that job. And so it's really opportunistic. But there's definitely been times when part of the HR leader's role as well is, hey, I've worked with this CMO in our hypothetical example. That person is a good at their current job, but they're horrible at developing their organization, and they're horrible at developing their successor. And so, more than once in my career, I've had to kind of go to the leader of the organization and say, hey, we've got a problem, and we got to kind of figure out how to solve that problem. And sometimes that alone, that one activity of a CMO being really fighting against developing the organization and developing a successor, that single flaw in their leadership ability has forced us to have to make a change in that leader. Everything else is great. And if you just embrace what is, for any senior leader in any organization, one of your key duties has to be to have great contingency plans in place for every potential issue that may happen in the business. And succession planning is one of those. And if you're a senior leader and you can't embrace that as one of your core responsibilities, the organization probably has to change you out.
I was thinking back to that vision I had of the C-suite conversation where we've got the CEO and 6, 7, 8 other C's sitting around the table. And the realization there is that of the 7 people that report to the CEO, should the CEO move on, only one of them could potentially move up. So the other 6 have to prepare themselves to move on. So preparing your replacement is either going to help you move up here or move up somewhere else. Whereas not doing it, as you were saying, Tom, is going to cause you to move on somewhere else, whether you wanted to or not. So it's almost as though it's no longer a damned if you do or damned if you don't. It's just damned if you don't.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And it's, it is just a fundamental responsibility of any senior leader in any organization is to plan for contingencies. So I think they're not doing their job if they're not taking succession planning seriously.
And you know what is interesting to me about this, though? Like, how many senior leader job descriptions have in the job description that it's part of your responsibility to create your succession plan? Because I mean, maybe I don't believe in absolutes, so maybe there's a couple of them floating around out there. But like, there's not. I read a lot of job descriptions because I think they're mostly terrible, but like they don't. And so then people come into a leadership role not knowing that that's part of their responsibility as a leader, especially if you're maybe a new leader. And so we're not really doing our leaders any favors if we're not informing them that this is actually, you shouldn't be surprised when you come into this role. I'm going to ask you to do succession planning because this is what good leaders do.
Absolutely. No, I agree with you. Yeah, it isn't in many job descriptions, but it should be for sure.
Tom, I want to shift a little bit. I want to shift the conversation to financial impacts. How can increasing employee compensation lead to cost savings?
Yeah. So I've actually gone through this several different times in my career. So when you have a turnover issue, there's always lots of causes for turnover. But one of a common cause is not paying people the same compensation that they can get somewhere else. And so, not everybody is focused just on money. In fact, most people are not focused just on money. But for most people, if they come across an opportunity that will increase their pay by 20 or 30%, they're going to take a good hard look at that. They're going to be like, wow, that's, we're not talking about a couple of percent. We're talking about 20 or 30%. And so if you are, as an organization, paying well below market and you're having high turnover, that's probably the first thing you need to fix. And so I've worked at several different companies and had this exact same experience where I come into the HR role, we have high turnover, I do a salary survey, I come back to the organization and say, well, there's probably lots of other things we can do to help improve our turnover, but everything else we do is going to make a little bit of a difference. But if we have a dramatic increase in the compensation for the employees, it's going to make a dramatic difference in turnover. And then every single time, at least the 6 or 7 times that I've done it in my career, the head of the organization and the head finance person says, well, we can't afford to do that. And I'm like, well, you can't afford not to, but let me go do the work. So then I have to go partner with, in a manufacturing organization. I did this where their the people on the front line were making probably 30% lower than what was the median wage in the area. So in that instance, I went and partnered with a couple of the industrial engineers and the supervisors, and we really quantified what is the cost of turnover. And so in this example, when they would hire somebody in, they would come in and they would be like 30% of productivity on the manufacturing line of somebody who had been there for a year. And then we would, kind of look at, all right, somebody who's been here for a month. Well, they're at 50% of the productivity of somebody who's been for a year. Somebody who's been here for 2 months, maybe they're at 70% of the productivity of somebody who's been for a year. And in this specific case, it was literally like a 9-month process before somebody became as productive in on this manufacturing environment as somebody who'd been here for a year. And yet they're paying the person who just started the exact same amount that they're paying somebody who's been here for a year. And so you're wasting, you're basically, need to hire 3 people and so it costs you 3 times as much to get the productivity as somebody who's been here for a year. And so you go and quantify that cost of turnover. And then in this example, there was also a big cost of quality because it was the same issue that the quality defects of the new hires was much higher than somebody who had been here for a year. And so you quantify all of those. And then there's really easy to quantify costs, like, how much time, you need. In this specific case, we needed a full-time dedicated recruiter because they had to hire so many people that, once we fixed the turnover, we were able to, have that person do something else in the organization and only spend a fraction of her time recruiting manufacturing workers. And so, we went and quantified the cost of turnover, went and looked at not only what other organizations that competed for us for talent, what they were paying and what their turnover rate was. And there's a very definite correlation. So you can predict, hey, and in this example, our turnover was like 100%. Literally, this manufacturing plant had 200 people working there, and they were hiring 200 people every year for the 200 people that were working there. And we went and increased the starting wage by 30%, and the turnover decreased to like 40%. So and absolutely everybody will agree we saved money by increasing the wage tremendously.
Excellent.
I think that I heard a story once about like a catering business who did the same thing. They wanted to get the best people, and they wanted to have, because they're trying to create a specific customer experience, that they wanted to have consistent staff. So people who have year-over-year Christmas parties and things like that can get the same staff. And so what they did is they increased the wage by $2 an hour. But that made it like way higher than anybody else in the industry. So everybody wanted to work there, but it was also based on like, we actually are taking the actions to keep you as employees because we want to keep you as employees. So there was leadership listening and all these different things that played into it too. But it was like, from a business perspective, and this is small business, right? So they probably employ like 15, 20 caterers. This is such a small increase from a wage perspective in terms of our overall budgets, but increased their revenues ended up being like way higher, because then the people who work there are telling their friends like, you should hire us as a business because these guys are awesome, and they increase their business by like 40% and their cost by like 5% or something. So makes a big difference on that human connection with people. And at the end of the day, there's always going to be a financial component at play. If I know I'm getting paid 30% less than market, do you think I'm not constantly out looking for another job where I can fill that gap? Of course I am. right? But even if I'm making market wages, that like the possibilities, back to possibilities of me sticking with that organization and investing in my growth so that I want to become that person who is 100% productive, right? Like it makes a big difference to the people. So you can never ignore your human experience can be as good as you want, but if you're getting paid 30% less than market, people are always going to be looking for a different opportunity.
That's right. No, you're exactly right. And that's why I think it's really important for every company to look at information to make sure they know what market is. Because I mean, in this case, it wasn't because they were purposefully trying to pay people below market. They just weren't paying attention. And over time, they hadn't given the increases and they were at market, like 5 years before, but they just, they were given kind of 2 and 3% increases when their competitors were given 3 and 4% increases, and just over time they fell way below the market.
So compensation is a big piece of the benefits package, probably the biggest, but there are other elements to it as well. So what are some innovative approaches to providing competitive benefits while managing costs?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is hard today in the United States to attract great employees without having good benefits, without having good competitive medical, dental, vision, 401k with a good match. I mean, if you don't have that element, a lot of great employees aren't going to be, wanting to come to work for you. Now, there are some really small companies that I work with that because benefits are not cheap for sure. They're very expensive. And so there are a few small companies I work with who have consciously, they're less than 50 employees. The law in the United States has changed to where if you're more than 50 employees, you pretty much have to have benefits, or it's really cost prohibitive. But if you're less than 50 employees in the U.S., you don't have to have medical benefits. And there's actually a few small companies who have said, you know what, we're not going to offer them. And I'm like, okay, it's going to be harder to recruit. That's all right. We're going to change our strategy, and we are only going to recruit people who have significant others that already have benefits. That is our target recruiting market. And it works. Now, they need to be much more proactive recruiting and they do invest much more time and energy and money into recruiting, because they can't just put up an ad on LinkedIn or Indeed and get a bunch of resumes. They have to be much more proactive. They need to network with their existing employees. They need to reach out to a lot more candidates to find people that really don't care about benefits. But there is a segment of the population that their significant other has benefits. And so other than the 401k, they literally don't care. My significant other has great medical, great dental, great vision. I gain nothing by coming to work for a company that has that. And and so maybe I'm giving up on the 401k and the 3 or 4% match that I might get at another company. But if you pay me 10% more, I'm very happy. And in fact, a lot of people, if you just paid them the 4% more, most people, and in fact, I am continually shocked at companies that offer great 401k and matching. And usually, on average, 30 to 40% of the employees, if they don't have automatic enrollment seems to cure this, but if the company doesn't have automatic enrollment, 30 to 40% of employees in most companies, regardless of how good their 401k match is, don't contribute to the 401k, are giving up free money because they don't take the initiative, or they don't want to give up whatever it is they're spending that 3 or 4% on. But there's a segment of the population for sure. So it depends on your strategy, and the population that you're trying to attract and retain, as far as what your benefit strategy is. But benefits for the most part are pretty important to attract and retain most great employees in the United States, at least.
I should think you'd have to be pretty creative around that, though, because it's my understanding that marital status cannot be one of the factors that you use in hiring, correct?
Well, no. So in those companies that I work with that do that, they're very upfront about, we don't offer benefits, so it just screens out, and so yeah, you're not screening for, does your significant other have benefits, but you're just leading, hey, look, please don't even apply. Full transparency. We're a small business. We don't offer benefits. And then, natural selection means that then only those people that don't care about benefits, and so literally when these companies are advertising, it's not, hey, we're advertising for a marketing specialist. That's kind of like, second row down on the job posting. First job posting is, great company, base pay and bonus above market. We don't offer medical and dental.
And I think I think that transparency is the thing that matters there, right? Because I know lots of people who are in that scenario. I used to be married to a banker. They had like the greatest benefits. It was completely irrelevant to me. Benefits were irrelevant to me. And so there's lots of people who will accept that, especially if there's higher pay, or maybe even like, again, for me, I want to be like more creative with my role and what I can do at an organization. So if that means that I have to trade benefits, then I'm okay with that because I have benefits over here. So I love that you said that, though, because one of the things I think that happens a lot, and I don't know, I'm not in HR, but this happens in marketing, so I would extrapolate it to the other departments, is that we think this has to be structured exactly one way, and that this is about like, there's this one magic HR structure and I have to like find my way into that. But that's not necessarily true. This is your organization. This is what you believe. You're being fully transparent. I think that work in office should be the same thing. If you're expecting people to work in the office, just be transparent about it. So the people who don't want to work in an office filter themselves out at the beginning. Okay? But it's about a human alignment thing. And if you're being transparent, it allows me to align with you. And if you're not, then like that's where the problems happen. Right now, I am going through a role for a CMO, and all of a sudden you're like, well, there's no benefits. But this is a senior leadership position. What are you talking about? There's no benefits, right? Because it's outside of the norm. So like, just say that up front, then I know what I'm getting myself into, and I can decide if I want to do that. I have a quick question. I know that we're getting short on time, but I wondered what your thoughts are on like fractional employment. Because I think from a like fractional perspective, there's like less requirements from having benefits and things like that. And there's, for some people, that space of like, oh yeah, I could be a 20-hour. I had a boss once who was like, you could be the VP of marketing. And I'm like, but I'm part-time. And she's like, that's fine. You could be a part-time VP of marketing. And I'm like, well, if you think so, I accept. But I think there's a lot of possibility in the like fractional arena. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, so I work for Preferred CFO, and we are a fractional firm. So that is what we do is small companies who want access to senior level talent, but can't afford, and there's probably not a full-time job for a CFO or for a head of HR at a company with 20 or 30 employees, right? I mean, that's not a full-time job, but they want to have that senior leadership. And so that's what we do is we have a CFO or we have a head of HR who is part of the leadership team and is showing up at all the meetings and is taking the full responsibility for that function and is managing that function. And in some cases, and in a lot of cases, actually, is managing some full-time employees that actually work for the company, but report to someone who works for our firm, but is part of the team. And I think that is the solution for small companies where the head of the company thinks is acting as the expert in all of these areas. Well, if you are the expert in finance or accounting or marketing or whatever, great. But if you're not the expert, if you don't view yourself as an expert, you're probably right. And hiring somebody on a fractional basis who is an expert is exactly the right way to do it. And so, part of my role at Preferred CFO is I go recruit a bunch of CFOs for our firm. And we have everything from people that, just like this environment and work for us full time and have, 7 or 8 clients that are doing this on full time. We have people who are kind of like semi-retired, but don't really want to retire. But they don't want to work, 50, 60 hours a week like they used to. So maybe they have 2 or 3 clients and they're working, 20 or 30, maybe sometimes in a busy week, 40 hours a week, but they like it. And then we actually have a few CFOs. I would never say their name because I don't know if their current employers know this, but they have a full-time job. And then for whatever reason said, hey, I could have 1 client, it'll keep me engaged and, whatever their motivations are. Sometimes it's just, a little boredom at their current role. Sometimes it's that they enjoy a little variety. And sometimes it is they want to make a little extra money or whatever it is. But we have some of those as well. And I think that, the gig economy is kind of, this is becoming more and more prevalent. I think is a great way for small companies to have access to great talent and for people that are experts to, have a little more flexible working environment if that's what they're looking for.
Tom, this has been fantastic. Thank you. To our audience, thank you. Thank you for participating. Thank you for the comments. Tracy, as always, great to see you. Thank you for being here. Tom, how can people get in touch with you?
So you can go to preferredcfo.com, or if you Google Tom Applegarth, I'm always on the first page. Luckily, there's not that many Tom Applegarths in the world. So you can hook up with me at preferredcfo.com or LinkedIn.
Fantastic. This has been another edition of the Digital Download. If you have something to say, if you want to be a guest on the show, we want to hear from you. Scan the QR code on screen or visit us at digitaldownload.live and click on the Be Our Guest.
I never get it
For
right.
myself, for Tracy, for Alex, shout out to Alex. Hope all is well with the puppy. Tom, thank you very much for being here. And we will see everyone next week.